We just quoted Stravinsky's super weird statement that basically says if it's not traditional, it's plagiarism. You'd think plagiarism means copying something from the past, which is a part of tradition, right? Well, Stravinsky is like, nah, if we can't find any link to tradition in a piece of art, then it's definitely plagiarism. What's he getting at? He's saying if someone thinks they're creating something totally brand new, all from their own creativity and not based on anything from the past, Stravinsky claims that's actually plagiarism. It seems like a total contradiction, but what's the real deal? Well, coming up with something pure and new is just not doable. When an artist has a feeling to express and says they're using a totally new way and tools, it can't all be just from them. What's really going on? It's like a subconscious picking up of habits. In this subconscious getting of habitual practices, artists unknowingly believe they're creating something totally new. If you break down all the elements of this super innovative work, none of it actually comes from the artist, even though they think they're being innovative. The mix of all these different elements might seem like something totally new, but in reality, they all have their roots somewhere. When it comes to abstract painting today, it's the same deal. Don't assume that abstract painters are always coming up with completely original stuff. Once abstract painting became a recognized style, it became a tradition. You're either consciously part of that tradition or you're doing it without even realizing. Doing it without realizing means you're leaving yourself open to accusations of copying. The artist might think they're being totally groundbreaking, but they're actually just using stuff that's already out there. Subconsciously picking up these routines leads to unintentional copying. You can't just conjure up something totally new out of thin air, even if the artist thinks they can. So, this statement is pretty bold, but we do still see innovation happening. Changes in artistic styles, sometimes they're massive, like in music, going from classicism to romanticism, that's a big shift. But who brought about that change? It was Beethoven, who had major success in the classical style. What's Beethoven all about? He's the ultimate classical composer and the one who kicked off the Romantic era. So, this example really drives home the point. Tradition is a must-have for innovation. In my art philosophy book, I reference Stravinsky's 4 paragraphs. It's really cool and totally on point. It's all about the real deal when it comes to making art. So, on page 148, Stravinsky gets into the whole tradition thing in his important work, 6 Lectures on Music Philosophy. In the first paragraph, he's like, when I sit down to work and see all these possibilities, I can't help but feel a bit freaked out. It's like everything is wide open for me. If everything, good or bad, is up for grabs, and anything is within reach, then it's like any effort seems impossible, and I can't find anything to hold on to. So, at the start of creating, it's like all these possibilities are there, and I'm faced with a ton of options, which he says freaks him out. If everything is possible, then it's like, how do I even choose among all these options? So, then he goes into the second paragraph, where he's like, unlimited freedom throws me into a kind of pain, but then something else helps me out, because I can always focus on the specific things in front of me. I don't need some abstract freedom, what I need is something clear and definite, something that, when it matches up with my potential, will help me create. This paragraph is super important too. We can't think that artists create with total freedom. He says if we have total freedom, it's just painful. But there's something else that helps us out. What is it? This thing lets me focus on specific things right away and leave behind that abstract freedom. This thing is something clear and definite, and if it matches up with my creative ability, it totally helps me create. I once came across this thing about Shostakovich, the big shot composer from the old Soviet Union. When he was teaching composition to his students, he kept telling them how important it is to imitate. But hold up, does that mean he was telling them to copy and paste? Nah, not really. So, when you're getting into the whole creation thing, those early attempts aren't just straight-up copies. As a composer, when you get a musical idea, it's like an artist getting a vision. Once this musical idea pops up, how do you figure it out? You gotta bring it to life through creation. It's through creating that we can really show what's in our hearts with that musical idea. So, where do you get your creation method from? You know your musical idea is one of a kind, and if it turns into a full-on piece, then that's a successful artistic creation. How do you make this happen? By imitating. So, you gotta get to know the works of a bunch of awesome composers from back in the day. The way these works are put together might seem like just an outer shell. But he's saying, when you've got this musical idea, try developing it using Mozart's approach. And if you can really pull it off, if you can fully bring out your unique musical idea using Mozart's work as a guide, then you've got something cooking. That's how music composition works, and literary creation is the same deal. It all starts with imitation. To be a poet, you gotta read a ton of poetry, no doubt about it. When you dive into all that poetry, you start to get a feel for it and get loads of your own poetic ideas. As you read the works of those who came before, you start to pick up on the structure of those poems and find it super helpful. I've dabbled in it myself. Sometimes, I think about writing modern Chinese poetry in everyday language, and I know a few ways to do it. Then it hits me that one method is really good, so I take the most representative structure of that style and read it over and over. After soaking it in, I start to imitate it, but the poetic ideas are all my own. The way I develop those ideas is totally inspired by that poem, but I end up creating a whole new one. Sure, it's a bit awkward to admit that I'm following in the footsteps of that poet, but it's just part of the process. How do I imitate that poetic structure with such expressive and emotional language? Exactly. I'll do the same. And there you have it, your poetic ideas are out there. If you get good at this, you can churn out loads of poems in a day. I've just realized that pop songs have their own format, don't they? The first part of the song is like an introduction, you know, where they bring out the main theme. After the intro, the song reaches its peak. What do they call it? A chorus. You could write 3 choruses a day if you wanted, no problem, just copy the style. Later on, I found out that most songs are like this nowadays. Sometimes I go to karaoke with young people and sing along. They like to sing modern songs, but I don't find the tunes very appealing. But after a while, I realize that there's a pattern, a real pattern. Oh, if this song is a hit, it's definitely because of the catchy chorus, right? That's where the magic happens. So what everyone remembers is the melody of the chorus. It gets us all hyped up, right? It's just this formula, nothing too complicated. But this is just the first step into the tradition, so what Shostakovich said is true, telling his students to imitate, imitate, and imitate again. Don't think you can be a groundbreaking composer now, you have to imitate, there are so many things for you to imitate. So here Stravinsky said, if we face unlimited freedom, then we are in pain, so who helps us get rid of this pain? Traditional things come in. In the third paragraph, he basically said, it's like the more I'm boxed in and the more obstacles I face, the more my freedom feels real and complete. Sounds like a total mind bender, right? So, for us modern folks, is it a real pain in the neck to write Chinese classical regulated verse, especially in the Jintishi style? I mean, it's not just about rhyming. Take a poem with 8 lines, for example. We gotta have 2 sets of matching characters in the middle 4 lines. And the rhyming has to be spot on, which is another headache. The number of characters is fixed, the rhyme scheme is fixed, and then there's this tricky thing called ping zai sheng, level and oblique tones. Ping, level, against zai, oblique, zai against ping, and there are a bunch of different formats for these ping zai sheng. You can dive into studying them, but once you've got the whole deal down, you'll realize that writing poetry is no walk in the park. You feel all hemmed in, and then you start saying that these strict rules are cramping our style. At first, we might think that way, but we're way off base. People often compare writing regulated verse to what? Dancing with shackles. So these shackles are supposed to be holding back our freedom, right? But Stravinsky is all about what? It's giving us freedom. The more limits we put on ourselves, the more we can break free from the chains of the spirit. The more obstacles around me, the more complete and meaningful my freedom becomes. Wrap your head around that. What kind of principle is that?